Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Karabiner 98B. It's not very short at all, to be honest, but it does have a bent down bolt handle. For a time, it was Germany's one and true official production rifle, though it had to share the stage with a great many leftovers. We'll go over all this and more after we get a look at it in the light box. With an overall length of 49 1/4 inch and weighing in at, well, just shy of 9 pounds, you would be forgiven for thinking that this was just the regular old Gewehr 98, because it dang near is. The magazine capacity is still 5 rounds, that's a staggered flush magazine fed from a stripper clip, and of course the cartridge is 7.92 by 57 millimeter. You know, every year it feels like these rifles become more and more valuable to the collectors who hoard them, and yet, despite such a heavy investment and responsibility to preserve a literal piece of history, I hear many of them are using inferior gun oils, whether they flat out fail to prevent rust or just gum up into a glue that gathers other contaminants, or perhaps they work fine up until they don't. None can prove over a century of successful use without harming a valuable artifact, safe for metal, wood, leather, and harmless to your human meat body. Ballistol has always been our go-to oil. So imagine our delight when they agreed to help fund the show, allowing us all to enjoy these stories for centuries more to come. Try them out and make sure to say that we sent you. Now, even with that aid, the vast majority of our funding does of course come from you, the viewers, so consider supporting us for as low as $1 a month. Now today's story starts just as the Great War was ending. The German Empire's primary arms for that conflict were both built on the same Mauser 1898 action. The first was the Gewehr 1898 long infantry rifle. The second was the Karabiner 98, which was effectively a short rifle acceptable for cavalry, artillery, and other specialty troops. Roughly 10 million Model 98 rifles and carbines would be produced for the German Empire before and during the Great War. They were, of course, wielded in the largest and most devastating conflict in human history to that date, a fight that was at the intersection of total war and industrialization. Leading the Central Powers, Germany had taken quite a bit of territory, and despite some retreat, it held the line outside of its own borders throughout the conflict. Despite never being invaded, though, the German Empire was struggling internally. Materials and food were in short supply, and of course labor and personnel were the same, given the attrition of human lives. Its allied nations were losing ground rapidly, or already defeated. Back in 1917, parts of the German government appealed to sue for peace. Now in 1918, this matter was more acute. In September, the Supreme Army Command informed the Emperor that the situation was hopeless and defeat was inevitable. From here, the German Empire began negotiating an end to the war. As part of this, demands were made, which included the abdication of the Emperor. In October, Germany became a parliamentary monarchy, though Wilhelm did not abdicate. As the public became informed, the war-weary were ready to be done with the emperor in exchange for peace. In October, the Imperial Naval Command attempted to engage in one last battle with the British Royal Navy. Mutiny, of course, followed. Sailors were uninterested in risking their lives for an already defeated nation. Mishandling of this event began the spread of a socialist revolution in the west of Germany. This actually included the declaration of a People's State of Bavaria, which deposed King Ludwig. In Berlin, things were even more confused, such that the emperor's abdication was actually declared without his ever having agreed to it. Even so, it wasn't enough to stop a series of declarations of new governments for the nation from various factions. In this chaos, the Entente offered harsh terms for a ceasefire, which did actually ultimately come to pass. On November 11th, the guns fell silent at the front, but the political war within Germany was still ongoing. Frankly, it's beyond the scope of our episode today to track the various factions and the details that go into the clash and crumble, mostly over a few short months. In the broadest sense, all you need to know is that the Social Democratic Party of Germany managed to hold on to control into January of 1919 against other similar organizations, angered monarchists, and especially communist revolt. Following a National Assembly election, that SPD took the majority of votes. In February, their leader, Friedrich Ebert, was elected the first president of the new Republic of Germany. This is commonly called the Weimar government, as they moved from Berlin to the city of Weimar to get some distance from the ongoing chaos. Germany, however, was still in trouble. Protest, revolution, illness, and starvation were all unfortunately common. The Entente had continued their blockade of goods until the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in June of 1919, so well after the armistice. This agreement included territorial concessions, addressed alleged war criminals, including putting Kaiser Wilhelm on trial, established the independence of some states who had been under the empire, and famously included oppressive reparations payments to the Entente powers by Germany. It also severely restricted the size and armaments of the German army, which now became the Reichswehr or Reich Defense. A 100,000-man limit was imposed. Arms were also restricted according to a series of tables. Particular to the small arms, only 792 machine guns were allowed, 1,134 light machine guns, 84,000 rifles, and 18,000 carbines. Ammunition was similarly affected, 8,000 rounds per automatic and 400 per shoulder arm. Police forces were limited at 150,000 men, one of 3 of which were permitted a carbine. Various other departments like the gendarme, forestry and fishery, border guards, customs, prison, railway, and depot guards added up to another 63,227 armed personnel. The type of arm was often debated. By example, the German government insisted that rail guards needed rifles or carbines instead of just a handgun, as the tracks represent a long, open tract of land that they may need to defend. All in all, rifles and carbines combined represented roughly 200,000 legal arms for the government's forces. That's out of production of around 10 million before the end of the war. Even with attrition from combat, a lot of guns were seized and destroyed. All of this was handled by the Inter-Allied Military Control Commission. Inspectors, however, were too few and far between and ranged from toothless to terribly annoying in regards to political fallout. In theory, the armistice halted all military rifle production in Germany, but evidence suggests otherwise. It seems factories were still quietly running at a severely reduced capacity, producing unmarked rifles, perhaps assembled from leftover parts, right up until maybe 1923, when the Allied powers became much more serious about the matter. Also, unfortunately for the Allies, and with mixed results for the Weimar government, a great many of arms had disappeared into the homes and cellars of the now civilian population. While many just held on to these as a potential personal defense measure in uncertain times, others saw them as a tool of paramilitary political control. One notable example of this would be the Freikorps. Loosely estimated at 500,000 men strong just in formal membership, this was largely an anti-communist force, which was mostly allied with President Ebert in his bid to restrict the German left. Now, the Freikorps' first notable clashes were with the communist Spartakists in January of 1919, even before the election. Freikorps members often maintained quiet relationships with various state governments and officials. Their nominal independence, however, often thwarted Allied officials from seizing their numerous small arms, as they didn't necessarily have direct force right there to grab them. Still more arms were in the hands of the Bavarian Citizens' Defense Guards, who had as many as 190,000 rifles and carbines. This was a right-wing paramilitary force, much like the Freikorps, though it was also hostile to the Weimar government and Berlin. Fun fact, collectors often find German arms marked EWB. This is from the Einwohnerwehr, Bavaria. These paramilitary groups irked the Allied inspectors, to say the least. They were actually considered a part of the German army and were subject to the drawdown with an initial due date in March of 1920. That month, however, would be a fairly eventful one. Beginning on the 13th, Freikorps units under General von Lüttwitz occupied Berlin, attempting to restore a German autocracy, all while the Reichswehr mostly sat on its hands. This Kapp putsch ultimately failed due to bureaucratic resistance and much of the general population just going on strike, basically tanking the government. The strike in turn escalated into a communist uprising in the Ruhr region. This was severely suppressed by the Reichswehr, along with Freikorps units, which is kind of confusing. Over 1,000 workers, largely armed, would be killed, along with 600 or so Reichswehr and Freikorps soldiers. While that was going on, another communist uprising was attempted in the industrial region of Saxony, though this too failed. The next month saw the Citizens' Defense Forces pitted against a Polish uprising in Upper Silesia. And I think at this point, you kind of get the idea. Following these events, the paramilitary groups were, as best as possible, disbanded, or like the Freikorps, were drawn down over the next year, ultimately devolving into a sort of political gang, little more than street thugs. Given these repeated internal conflicts, the German government, curiously, in agreement with the Allies, sought to further disarm the civilian population. In August of 1920, they began offering 100 marks for each military firearm turned back in. Short of funds, this bounty fell to just 50 marks in October. Simultaneously, all arms in government inventory were marked with a 1920 stamp. That way, they couldn't be absconded with, and just turned in over and over again for more cash. It also served to differentiate just loose arms from stolen government property for some years to come. Now, this was all done under the Disarming the People law, which banned ownership of rifles designed for jacketed or armor-piercing ammunition. This allowed most black powder arms to remain out there, even if former military, but did mean some hunting rifles chambered for modern cartridges had to be turned in. Now, this complete eradication of surplus arms did, to a degree, backfire. It allowed for no replacement of current inventory when faced with the inevitable wear that was put on the small number of remaining service arms. Wartime production quality had also been rather poor at times, again adding to the problem of guns sort of wearing out. Basically, the Gewehr 98s in service would soon need new barrels at the very least, let alone numerous small parts that inevitably break from time to time. In 1921, we catch a glimpse at what was going on in the Reichswehr as an order appears for the production of a new rear sight, one intended for a new cartridge. Up until this point, Germany had stuck with their 7.92mm Spitzer bulleted smokeless cartridge, introduced all the way back in 1903, with full adoption coming in 1905. While a great improvement over the bottle-nosed Model 88, it wasn't all that it could be. It's believed that the German wartime production of a suitable replacement cartridge for captured French equipment led to the development of an improved cartridge of their own. The original French used a solid brass bullet, pointed and with a boat tail rear. This shape further stabilized the round in flight, and the extra weight was good too. Not wanting to waste precious brass, the German Empire duplicated the bullet in a jacketed lead core form. This seemed to have inspired a heavy boat tail version of their own rimless cartridge, which was initially meant for machine guns in service. Production was begun in 1918, but of course paused with the end of the war. Now, some years later, and with limited funds, the Reichswehr was especially interested in having only one cartridge in service. In testing, it actually proved to work better in short rifles than the previous S-Patron, and there was no great loss in the long rifle, despite its slower muzzle velocity. Now, at this point, the Weimar government was extremely poor and frankly still unstable. It might have seemed odd to spend money at all, but, happily, they could introduce a new sighting system that would prevent a lot of extra expense when it came time to service these same rifles later on, one based on Mauser's tangent rear leaf. The original form of this was rejected by the German government in 1898, though it was popular abroad. Simple, strong, and efficient, it was a winning design. However, it could still be improved somewhat. Mauser's 1908 patent covers an improved design. Here, the sight base has been fitted as a separate component. In this way, any damage could be more easily repaired by just replacing the base. Also, if any change was made to the service cartridge, mass swapping of sight leaves and bases would be a simple matter. A new rear sight based on this patent entered production as early as the end of the year 1921, perhaps even sooner. They ended up being paired with not one, but two rifle patterns. And the true date on when each started isn't 100% set in stone, so I'm honestly just going to put this in an order of simplest change to most dramatic change, which means that I actually need to show you this, what collectors commonly call the Gewehr 98M for modified, although there's not an official title. It's an updated Gewehr 98. Let's get in the Lightbox. I don't think it's going to be any surprise to tell you that this rifle has the same length and weight as the Karabiner 98B, which basically has the same length and weight as the previous Gewehr 98, 49¼ inch, almost 9 pounds, and of course, 5 rounds staggered, box magazine, stripper clip, 7.92x57. We're recycling guns, and we're recycling our stats. Now, I've basically already covered the development history for this rifle, so it might be easier to explain it by just taking a closer look at it and temporarily setting aside our Karabiner 98B while not disturbing our precious Ballistol. Let's get a look. Now, to my eye, this rifle has been beautifully redone at some point in its life, probably in the collecting world, but despite all the mismatched parts and the cleaned up wood, I think it's going to tell us what we need to know, which is that mostly it's a Gewehr 98. Same buttstock, same butt plate. The ferrule is a late feature of the Gewehr 98. This is for taking down the firing pin from essentially the cocking piece. And then if we bring it forward, we've got our secondary sling position, usually for parade, and reinforcing lug, 98 action, bottom floor plate. This gets different, so we'll skip that for a moment. We have our little half hand guard. We have a band, a lower band with spring set. Early examples of these tend to be just like the Gewehr 98, thin like this. Later ones tend to be wider, about where my thumb is now. I just don't happen to have one of those here at the moment. If we bring it forward, you'll usually see that same forward parade swivel position here on the H-band lug, bayonet lug, or H-band with the bayonet lug. There's your, God, guys, clearing rod. I don't know what is going on with me today. And then front sight that's adjustable, although that would have been, not at a individual level. Now, if we bring it back, the big differences would have been usually a blued bolt. This one doesn't have a blued bolt. It's also not a matched bolt, so I can't be sure that this was supposed to be on this rifle. But imagine if it was blued, and then you'd have pretty much all of them. And then this rear sight sticks out. A flat tangent adjustable to 2,000 meters with a single button on this side that you can walk in and then lock in position. I'm going to be honest with you, coming from the older tangents, this still isn't as nice as the back and forth we've seen on some export Mausers, and it feels almost a little too slick. It takes a bit of effort to drop in exactly where you want without it wandering too much. So not my favorite, but not the worst either, and certainly a vast improvement over the Longa Vizier. You can see that it's in no way additionally protected, and then you probably can glance some markings that definitely came about a lot later than the original Imperial production. Now, what's critically different about this from previous flat Mauser sights is this line here that you can see sort of swinging up, our little waveform. This is actually, it's fun to think about, but when we adjust this sight along this line here and it raises our sight for us, this is the arc of our bullet's trajectory. I mean, this is trajectory spelled out in a tiny little form on the gun. So when we set a range here, this blade is now replaceable. This unit can be swapped out very inexpensively from this gun in case ammo ever changes or this becomes damaged. Previously, you would have had to drive the whole thing off of the barrel. That's a major overhaul versus some, well, frankly, field armorer work. Now, of course, the action here is the same as on the Gewehr 98, so no need for an animation, but we did take the chance to shoot this guy. Now, just about everything small arms in the early Weimar period is a bit difficult to pin down exactly. I've done my best to review all the material available for reading as of creating this video. It isn't entirely clear when this model actually entered production for sure, and of course it overlaps service with our headliner today. If it did begin in 1921 or so, it was not in large numbers. Period documents suggest that refitting was to begin in 1922. By 1924, however, this modification was clearly being applied to existing arms. Conversion was a fairly straightforward process and could be undertaken at any number of depots, though I have seen Spandau mentioned directly. Over time, a couple of changes did occur in the pattern. Early sight bases were open-bottomed, just like the previous carbine pictured here. Later, they were boxed in like our example rifle today. Earlier Gewehr 98Ms used original Gewehr 98 rear barrel bands. Further on, an improved wider rear band was fitted. In theory, there should be a fairly low number of Gewehr 98Ms, as Germany was limited to just about 200,000 shoulder arms, including carbines, by Versailles. Yes, we know that Germany would later rearm, disregarding the Allied powers, but even then, they would need new production if they had ever destroyed all but 200,000 rifles and carbines at one choke point in history. This, however, seems to have never come to pass. With the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, previously hidden rifles re-emerged in numbers that seemed to exceed the publicly known German limit several times over. Most of these were, of course, updated to the new standard cartridge, which means the Gewehr 98M ballooned in the early 1930s. While exact numbers are not known, it's estimated in the hundreds of thousands. It's also been found that a number of rifles were still being assembled from hidden parts and, to more or less of degrees, manufactured quietly in German facilities starting in the mid-1920s. These, too, would be in the new standard pattern, or at least would later be converted to the new standard pattern. While the Gewehr 98M, as we're calling it, provided Germany with an inexpensive way to modernize their existing rifles, and a pattern for rebarreling as those wore out, it was still just about as awkward as the original Gewehr 98. Absolutely unsuited for the cavalry and various other troops who saw the rifle as secondary to their immediate duty. The Karabiner 98 was still in inventory, but while they shared the same action, minor changes were made to the Karabiner to shave weight and length, which means only a minority of parts could interchange with the infantry rifle. Attempting to produce whole carbines or replacing their parts would mean a whole other supply consideration, something absolutely unwanted in the financially devastated Weimar years. So let's rewind our story back to 1920. At the time, the Reichswehr was aware that the estimated average service life for a Mauser 98 action was to be about 8 years. With that understood, some 15% of total available arms should be replaced immediately in order to get it done with the available machining that they were allowed, etc. In some ways, this likely sparked the Gewehr 98 conversion program as a way of making do. But at the same time, it also spawned a project to settle on a single standardized shoulder arm acceptable to all branches of the armed forces. This very notion had already been realized by the British and Americans even before the Great War. It was coming rather late for Germany, but at least they had something equivalent right at hand. However, they did not choose that. Like I said, the Karabiner didn't share enough parts with the long rifle, so that was dead on arrival. Even with that aside, it appears there was still some love for the reach of the long rifle because short was never apparently on the menu. Instead, they actually turned towards what's known as the Radfahrgewehr, a rare variation of the Gewehr 98 intended for bicyclists, introduced in 1913. This was simply a Gewehr 98 with a bent bolt handle, relief for said handle in the stock, a stock hole for the sling, along with a rear barrel band with side sling loop, which was actually widened and set with a screw from underneath in order to reinforce it. The forward band lacks a parade hook, and no hole was left in the front of the trigger guard for the same purpose. It seems fewer than 2,000 were produced before wartime production needs saw them dropped in favor of just plain carbines or rifles. So these were rare enough to begin with, before many were destroyed post-war. The thing about compromise is that no one is completely happy. In order to standardize, the German Inspectorate for Weapons and Equipment for the Reichswehr began trials with an updated bicyclist rifle. It could be used for all infantry, cavalry, artillery, and other forces, though of course its length elicited plenty of complaints, but everything else worked out fine, so the project moved ahead anyway. What they came up with, of course, looks like the gun at the top of this episode. This guy. The earliest designation I know of for this particular rifle is Gewehr für Bereitene, a rifle for riders, i.e. mounted troops. A rifle for the mounted. Over time, however, it would come to be called the Karabiner 98B, which is also the most familiar for collectors today, so we'll just go with that. Now that we know why it is, let's actually give it a good inspection for ourselves. Get this guy out of the way. Now, at a glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was a Gewehr 98. I mean, there's a hint here. There's a big hint there. And then as we bring it down, it gets a little wacky. So what have we done? Well, we've adopted our side sling from like the Kar 98A or the bicycle rifle that we saw. And like the bicycle rifle that we saw, we have a turned down bolt scalloped here in the wood. This guy is, by the way, 100% round. There's no undercut or anything like that. The bolts are blued on these guns, unlike the wartime and pre-war guns. The trigger guard is actually just like the Gewehr 98s, but they no longer drill the hole for that secondary sling position because it's not underslung. If we bring it forward, yep, there's our updated rear sight, exactly like you'd expect, and no real difference from the Gewehr 98M we saw earlier. Same replaceable base, same graduations, you get the idea. All the way at the front, we don't have the hook for our parade position because, again, not underslung. Instead, there's our lower band, which is much beefier. By the way, this is how the updated lower bands on the Gewehr 98Ms would have looked, very big and beefy. It's still held by a spring clip. And if we flip her over, we'll see, yep, there's our fixed sling loop so that it would come through up here, go down through the hole in the stock, and this thing would go presumably up on your back. Now, while it might seem similar enough to a rifle from earlier, I know Mae loves carbines, so let's let her take a carbine for a spin. Totally different from the other gun we saw earlier. So the Reichswehr had selected a new carbine. Small problem, who is going to make it? The Allies had banned military production for the most part. Sniffing through the German factories, they classified all production machinery into three categories. Civilian use only, not suitable for arms or munitions production. Military use, exclusively useful for arms or munitions production. And mixed use, machines that were useful for either purpose. Number 1 was of course safe, number 3 was all but banned, and number 2 was assessed and monitored. Interestingly, France wanted those banned machines given to various Allied powers, but Britain insisted they just go ahead and smash them. However, because of the need for some martial supply, one factory was allowed to carry on at reduced capacity. The one chosen was Simpson and Company of Seoul. The Simpson family had been in the Seoul region since at least the 1700s. At first, mostly cattle dealers because of laws against Jewish property ownership. In 1847, they gained enough rights for brothers Loeb and Moses Simpson to soon found the Simpson Company. They began in iron forging. After Loeb's death, Moses partnered with Karl Luck and founded a rifle factory, which profited from the Austro-Prussian War and the Franco-Prussian War. Simpson's sons continued to inherit the business, and Luck left the partnership in 1884, making it just Simpson and Company, which expanded into swords, bayonets, bicycles, and even automobiles. Working with Krupp and Zeiss, they also developed artillery sights. This, of course, kept up during the war, with Simpson contracted for Gewehr 98 rifles, various machine gun parts, and much, much more. With the war over, Simpson and other commercial producers struggled to stay afloat. Some likely contributed to parts and rifle production outside of the terms of Versailles. In 1923, however, the Allied powers became more serious about controlling German arms. That year, France and Belgium occupied the industrial Ruhr district. This was in response to Germany's defaults on reparations payments. German passive resistance, especially production halts, made this unpopular and less than profitable for the Allies. The Weimar government supported the striking laborers, but being broke, they had to print money. Hyperinflation followed, bringing chaos to the country. By example, a loaf of bread went from the price of 160 marks to 200 billion marks in less than a year. This was only stabilized at the end of 1923 thanks to the introduction of the Rentenmark. Thankfully, it also led to reform of the reparations payments, which took some pressure off the Weimar government. Unfortunately, the whole debacle also planted seeds that would lead to the National Socialist growth. Now, extant Karabiner 98B configured rifles suggest that somehow the Reichswehr might have managed to begin production of their new standard, well, we're calling it Carbine now, but I guess they called it the Gewehr at the time, as early as 1922, though this might have had something to do with the trials process. This is also an area of research that is still fairly debated with circumstantial evidence today. Official production allowed a Simpson and Company made rifle to begin in 1924, after the financial crisis was stabilized. Early examples of the new Karabiner were still marked Gewehr 98 on the left receiver wall. That's fair because it was at the time the Gewehr für Beretene. They were also marked Simpson & Co. on the receivers along with the production date. This likely gave away too much information for the Reichswehr's comfort, so the receiver was later produced blank. A series of varied S markings turned up instead. These were actually placed on the right side. Soon after the receiver marking changed, so did the left sidewall. Very few have been found marked Gewehr 98B, but this seems to have rapidly given way to Karabiner 98B. This designation change was announced in November of 1925, so the change likely came the next year as stocks of parts were used up. In July of 1930, the marking was officially made Mod 98. It seems production at Simpson was halted later that same year, though. Total production by Simpson is estimated at some 70,000 Karabiners 98B, or whatever they wanted to be called at the time. Now, while all this was going on, Simpson also provided replacement parts for rifles and carbines being rebuilt at various depots. At some point, Simpson was not the only producer of the Karabiner 98B, though. A rare variant can be found in the collector's market. Known as the S-28 rifle for the small mark found on various components, these otherwise unidentified rifles have invited a lot of speculation. Analysis of proof marks and other features suggest later production, perhaps by Berlin Karlsruher Industry Work, the name that was given to Deutsche Waffen- and Munitionfabriken after the war in 1922. But because the matter isn't settled just yet, I'll leave it to you to do your homework and wade through the various arguments if you happen to be curious about those particular guns. Now, as we all know today, there would be a Second World War, but before that conflict cooked off, both the Gewehr 98M and the Karabiner 98B were replaced by a more sensible solution. The Karabiner 98K, with K meaning short. Finally, a universal short rifle. It was adopted officially in 1934, just 10 years after production began officially on the 98B. As these new short carbines, I remind you, they are the length of the old long carbine. Oh boy. As they came into service, the modified long rifles and Karabiner 98Bs were retired to second-line service, falling mostly into the hands of police and security forces. Even so, what had once been the official rifle of the Reichswehr did see limited use by frontline troops as late as 1939. While it isn't specific to a rifle today, I would also like to add a little historical note specific to Simpson & Company that may not fit well in our much larger look into the Karabiner 98K later on. The company was, during the Weimar era, headed by Arthur Simpson, who, being Jewish, had to contend with growing hostility in the German government. In particular, he was targeted by Ernst Fritz Sockel, who in 1927 published claims that Simpson and Company were frauding the Reichswehr by charging the government for part of the costs of their civilian bicycle production. Fortunately, for a time, Sockel had no authority. This changed, however, in 1933. He was appointed a Reichsdeputy and took after Arthur Simpson, who was jailed along with other members of his family for evading taxes. Simpson, by the way, denied this. He was ransomed into signing away his company to Fritz Sockel and then fled to Switzerland. The company then became the Berlin Suller Weapons and Vehicle Factory, shortened to BSW. Okay, I think that's got us all covered for today. So let's go ahead and wrap it up by getting Mae's opinion on both the carbine and the rifle, who are very, very different. All right, I made room for Mae.
He did.
And I
don't know who he is.
This is different from those other things. This is a Gewehr 98M, which is not an official designation. It's just the collector's one for the modified Gewehr 98.
Okay.
We also have a Gewehr 98.
M for modified.
As you can tell, these two things are very different.
I mean, you know, the long of us here, we've lost that. So what have they done to my boy?
Before we talk about the differences, just walk us through what you have in your hands. At least just give us an impression of it.
I mean, you are not wrong. It is a Gewehr 98.
No. We don't know about Gewehr 98.
Okay, well, I don't know about them all. Sure. All right. Well, we have a long rifle, half stock, semi-pistol grip. I'm going to hit you.
It's a full stock. It's a half handguard.
Well, yeah, full stock, half handguard. You're right.
Okay.
Technicalities there. Mauser action. We have a rear tangent leaf sight, barleycorn front. Nothing really seems all that remarkable. I mean, it's obviously pretty dense feeling, and at least the balance point is just ahead of the mag well, so it's not too bad. Semi-pistol grip, I think I already said that.
Stripper kit feed.
Yeah.
5 rounds.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I don't know. Remember, I don't know.
Okay, come on.
I don't know.
We're pretending you know what this gun is, at least.
Yep. Yep.
Lock open on empty.
Lock opens on empty. Seems pretty straightforward for a Mauser long rifle of the era in a lot of ways. Except
for it's from a different era.
Okay.
So if you saw this going into World War I, you'd think, perfectly normal rifle.
Perfectly normal.
By the 1930s, how are you feeling?
Not so great. Why do we have this again?
Yeah, it's very long.
Why do we go from short rifle to this?
Now, as a layman, could you possibly tell me the differences between this gun and that gun?
Well, obviously, like I said, the rear sight's different. We've gone from long of a Vizier to tangent leaf.
That's it.
Huh?
That's it.
No, I've got finger grooves now.
Oh, well, okay, so hold on. This is an early Gewehr 98. You are right. Early Gewehr 98 doesn't have finger grooves, doesn't have the takedown ferrule.
Oh, yeah.
However, that was technically added to Gewehr 98s before the end of the war.
Okay.
So, all right, Miss Sharpeye, it's fine.
Yeah, I saw it with
Do you actually like the finger grooves? Are they improvement?
I like the finger grooves, yeah. I think finger grooves are a good thing.
Here, put it up.
No, they are.
Okay,
inherently
put it up, yeah.
so.
Now you want this one?
There's no point. I know there's no point.
Okay, fine. All right, you like finger grooves.
Finger grooves are better than no finger grooves. I'm just going to go with that. You also have a little bit of weight reduction. Why would you say no?
You might be the only person on Earth that would have the wrong answer to this, but between these two rifles, the Gewehr 98 original and the Gewehr 98 modified, which do you prefer?
I'm going to miss the long of a Vizier, but this is probably objectively better.
Okay, but which would you choose?
I like the long of a Vizier sight.
You have German heritage, don't you?
Yeah,
you're a descendant of, Longa, aren't you?
I'm a descendant of something there, but yes. But, yeah. They look great.
You are the one family tree that thought this was a good idea.
Yeah, and we stuck with it.
Somewhere there's someone in the afterlife going, yes, thank you, I was right.
Yeah, pretty much.
But no, these are better.
I get it. Objectively, this is better.
Simpler, way easier to maintain, way easier to replace.
Sure. But why is this in the 30s?
Because they were poor.
Oh.
They had no money, and they wanted to they were trying to redo the sights on these for a new cartridge.
Okay.
It's because they wanted to consolidate on a slightly better cartridge. And when they did that, actually, if you pay attention to your rear sight, it has the risers are removable. So the actual, the little roller coaster gas.
Yeah.
They're removable too, which we've never seen before, actually. I know it's a minor detail. You might not even notice it looking at these guns.
Would not have.
But because those are removable, that means you only have to replace this and then the slide, not even necessarily the sliding button.
Yeah, they're dovetailed in there or something?
The leaf itself, you keep the slide, you can throw away the leaf, and you can throw away these two guys. Yeah, they're kind of dovetailed in there.
Okay.
And then swap in new ones. So, for at that time a nickel's worth of metal, you've got your thing changed out.
Do they have any issues with them falling out? No, it looks like they're retained pretty well. Okay.
No, they shouldn't fall out. Mm-hmm. I didn't see any reports of that.
I asked the questions.
So, it was frugality, essentially.
Sure.
But otherwise, you're right. It's like a Gewehr 98. When you shot it, oh, I'm sorry. I did say this one has a bolt in the white. It should be blue.
That's what makes me think. I wonder if that bolt's actually off of a Gewehr 98, because they should be interchangeable.
Yeah, there they are. It's the same bolt. So, instead of having a white receiver and a white bolt, you would have blue receiver, blue bolt.
I don't know how much that would feel, unless maybe there was an issue with the bluing process.
It'd be better for glare.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
So, I'd take the blued system if it were me.
Yeah, sure. Objectively, it's probably better.
And then, so when you pull the trigger feel any different?
No, pretty much
recoil feel any different?
I mean, not really from a Gewehr 98, no.
Yeah, okay. Controllable?
I mean, yeah, moderate.
I figure it's almost pleasant with this kind of weight.
It's not too bad.
Like, did you get kicked around at all?
No, I mean, fair. If I was shooting it for long periods of time, possibly it would start to wear on me a bit. But that might be more of the weight, less of the kick.
That's what I was about to ask. You're talking about the recoil, or you're talking about just the weight of the gun?
Yeah, the weight might be the thing that wears on me more than the actual kick.
It's kind of funny. You get to the point where the gun's heavy enough that your recoil's like, who cares? But then just picking the gun up and down. Although I will say, we shoot for presentation, not for combat.
Right.
You would have been prone. Or laid out a trench wall or something.
Hopefully, yes.
And so the gun would have been supported so that weight shouldn't beat you up as bad in those positions.
It really should be fine. So then in that case, recoil eventually would get to me, but it takes some time.
Although if you're not fully in place, if you're doing the elbow under and resting it out, it's still going to add up that way.
Yeah, it will.
All right, so now I have, thankfully, a totally different gun. This is the Karabiner 98B.
Okay.
So by the name alone, you'd think it was an update of the Karabiner 98A.
That's what I was thinking when you first told me we were going to do one of these, and then you pulled this out, and I went, no, it's not. No, it's not.
So coming from the Karabiner 98M.
Okay.
In this case, we have side slings.
Uh-huh.
And a wider lower band, although some of these had wide lower bands.
Okay.
They've ditched all the parade swivel stuff. And they turned out the bolt.
When it took the notch out of the wood.
Yeah.
Okay. But they didn't actually take any... They actually, on the Car 98A, they actually did take a little bit of metal out of the bolt handle itself. Meanwhile, this one, no. They're just like, no, you just get round.
No, we're saving money.
We're all money saved.
It doesn't turn down as badly either. It's actually an angled... It's like a hard angle downturn, almost like a Lee Enfield. Whereas the Car 98A is this round guy here.
Doesn't quite line up as well with the trigger as a result of the positioning with it.
Not only that, but the trigger is no longer scooched forward like on a Car 98A. That's just like a Karabiner 98. It's just a straight
Essentially, that's what it looks like, yeah. I mean, at least I've got the turn down bolt handle, which is going to make things faster, a little bit easier, more rapid.
Your transition to your trigger should be better, yes. Your leverage is wherever it's at.
Right.
But should be better.
Okay.
You're shooting for the shoulder, so you probably didn't notice much there.
Not really. If I honestly, with the exception of the bolt handle sticking out from my vision, objectively, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between this and the M. Because visually and also feel-wise, there's not really much of a difference.
Same recoil, same everything?
Same everything.
Well, this is very exciting.
I mean, you basically, it's like what you're saying with the Martini Henrys, like all of the different modifications. It's like, well, there's a lot of them are very similar in a lot of ways.
So if you had to pick an arm for an army, how would you rank these? Like, which one would be the worst one?
Well, I guess it depends on the standing of the army, too. If we're able to just pump them out and not worry about cost, I mean, Car 98's a pretty good way to go.
That's the worst?
The best one.
You're supposed to go worst to best.
Oh, worst to best. Oh, okay. Well, oh, God, you're not going to make me pick the Longa-Vizier sight. I mean, technically, that's
not
worse.
For you, for some army.
For some army, it's the worst.
Okay, then what's the next worst?
I would think, I guess it depends on what you're using it for, but I would think this is the second worst.
Okay.
The M. And then I would say the B is third worst, and then the 98 is obviously best.
Yeah, the A is best.
Yeah.
And they didn't just make more of those. They probably could have saved themselves a lot of effort by just making more Car 98As.
Right. I guess if you're trying to think of, like, in terms of cost savings, these really technically aren't too bad. It's just the problem is that for the time period, they weren't super great.
No, and then, by the way, you can convert one of these. I know somebody's going to say, you can convert one of these into a smaller rifle, obviously.
You could, yeah.
And you can even save some money by not worrying about that last centimeter of buttstock or whatever. And it probably would have come out pretty well. And as a matter of fact, if you imagine that gun converted into a short rifle...
Right.
You're pretty much ready for the next episode that we'll do on Mausers, which is not the next episode, by the way. Don't get too excited. I mean, it's going to look pretty familiar from there. But for some reason, they did not make that decision, most likely because just even turning the barrels down and refitting all the stocks and everything was going to be even more money spent.
Right.
Versus, like, let's just make them carry the bigger gun, which they don't have to spend any extra money to make you carry a bigger gun. Or any extra
training, potentially, on a transition, so...
And they're all supposed to be internal, and to be honest with you, I'm wondering, with the kind of riots and stuff that they were having, I'm actually curious. I can't find documentation around it, but I do kind of wonder if it comes back to that bayonet thing we talked about, where if you had to defend yourself, if you were in a line of men dealing with an angry mob... Right. Between the short one and the long one with bayonet, which one would you pick?
Well, the longer gets me longer range, I would think, for poking.
Yeah, and then, to be honest with you, if you're going to fire in the crowd and just start murdering people, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. But if you're doing crowd control, and it's been sort of mentioned by psychologists before, a bullet is a thing that people don't really understand until they understand it. a blade, a bludgeon, these are things we have experience with. We've cut ourselves before. We've been hit before.
Right.
Growing up, you take some knocks. Mm-hmm. There's something that our primitive brains understand about a long stick with a sharp thing on the end.
Right.
And a crowd that's worked up and not thinking clearly is more likely to respect a bayonet than they are to respect a bullet. So there may actually have been an element of, well, hold on, it might be better to just keep the long rifle.
Right, because visually it tends to have a bit more of an effect.
Right, but that is total speculation on my part, just to point it out. Like, I'm just trying to give a little bit of a +1 to these long rifles being in Weimar service, when clearly everyone else was moving to short rifle patterns. And it really apparently wasn't that expensive to make that decision either with the working stock that they had, because we'll see them make that decision later.
Sure.
But I think you guys get the idea, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's pretty much it for this episode.
We have actually several things to give away on this episode, so let's get down our list. Mm-hmm. Number 1 is actually our buddy Jordan Unger, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not, but he kindly lent us his Karabiner 98B.
Yes.
And then our buddy Brandon, who has been on the show a number of times, happily reminded me that he had a Gewehr 98M when I was talking about doing this episode, which made this a much better episode because we could really cover this in detail.
Yes.
And then again, I just want to make sure I say this one more time. Thank you, Miller.
Thank you,
Miller's
Miller.
Gun Parts.
Mm-hmm,
who
Miller's
hangs
Gun
out,
Parts.
He hangs out on our Discord, by the way.
Yes, he does.
But he loaned me some books that I swore I thought I had and I didn't.
And it would have been very pricey. And unfortunately, the episode may not have made it out for the time it made it out if we hadn't have gotten those in from him.
It's one of those books that, like, if I this, by the way, this is something you guys need to know and why you should be on our Patreon and things like that. There are books right now that if I try to buy them, the only way you'll find them for sale is for over $1,000.
Right.
They don't sell for $1,000. They just have people that sort of sit there and leave it out as bait and try to bluff the market up.
Yep.
Or they'll put one copy out for $1,000 and then they'll sell another copy for $400 so that it looks like you got a deal even though it used to be $100. Mm-hmm. So the problem is, in a pinch, because of this book squatting thing that happens, if I absolutely had to have those books in a hurry, we could have spent $2,000, $3,000 just on a couple of books.
Right.
If I didn't borrow them from a friend of mine. Now, if I wait a year or two and keep my line in the water, I'll fish them up and I'll probably spend $600, $700 in total. Even that, though, is pretty
still very
rough.
costly.
Like, that's a lot of expense. That's just for one episode of the show. So you guys can kind of understand how this starts to spiral out of control. So do think about joining us over on Patreon.
Thank you, patrons, for the support. We appreciate it.
Now, another form of support we have is the executive producers.
Oh, do we have one for this episode?
Well, there's a gentleman that had a couple credits left, and I've been trying to spread them out for him. He didn't really ask for these credits, but we put them in because
I get it.
he executively produced us. Mm-hmm. And that's our buddy Anthony.
Thank you.
So this is just another thanks. It's not particular to this episode, but he did kind of over-donate. Yeah. So we're just making sure we roll that in.
He gets his name flashed up, and then at the very end of the episode in the credits, your name gets in the executive producer credit as well.
Yeah.
So thank you, Anthony. We appreciate it.
And then otherwise, we're good. So this is going to be the last episode of the old system, unless all heck breaks loose.
So fingers crossed it doesn't, and this is the last time you see this specific setup. Same content, just differently colored or dressed.
Right. Those of you who are not patrons and are not caught up to date on this, we're reskinning the show. We've got a new studio built, and to be quite honest with you, we've been filming in a 10x10 room this entire time.
Yep.
And to do so, the camera that I'm talking to right now is actually where my second monitor normally is, in a closet where I hide my little computer. And so
it's a bottle of magnesium right there.
It takes like an hour plus to transform this room into the studio and then to tear it back down again with another hour. And then you can imagine once it's in this sort of binary state, I can't do any work at my machine. So then we have to sit down and do that. It causes scheduling insanity, especially if something gets interrupted with an emergency or anything like that.
Yep.
So we've invested in a new studio, which is why we haven't been traveling. We're going to try to change the way the show looks to better unify the themes.
Yes.
However, since the show takes somewhere on the order of minimum 70 to 80 hours a week for each of us, plus from there, it's been very hard to take time to build an outbuilding, get it staged and floored and everything like that. We basically run out of time. We need to make the commitment to just get this done. So we're going to halt episode production until the new studio is ready, however long it takes. We're hoping we'll only miss one episode. It is likely we might miss 2 episodes.
It's a possibility.
Just hold on. I'm very sorry. But we should be back after that unless something catastrophic has happened.
Yeah, so we're coming up on our 10-year mark. You see a lot of channels usually go down. No, we're doubling down.
Right. We're taking a brief hiatus but there will be no vacation. But we will be hustling our buns to give you a better experience. And the experience will be exactly what we've always been doing. In-depth firearms research and presentation, generally in this same format. Mm-hmm. So do not fear. We're just plus one in what we've already done. I'm not about to start doing a bunch of kooky stuff for attention. All right. Y'all have a good one.
That's you. Bye.
Yeah, but he was emailing me about t-shirts.
Oh.
So I don't...
Oh, he put a memo. Are you ready for this?
Oh, what's the memo?
Here's double grandma.
Oh, wow. He had his grandma's right.
Yeah, Alfred's right. He's on it. He knew the grandma.
So he did have a note. It was just hidden.
Okay, hidden note in the memo. Look at you, Alfred, sneaking it in there. Double grandma.
It's probably just because the first confusing package made us think the second one had to be confusing, too. Thanks, Alfred.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Well, we know he's listening to the podcast.
Alfred, that was funny.
For like one episode, it's fine.
Oh
one
my God,
episode.
the
That's what they always do. They
and
always
crying.
do. Yeah, but it's great
So many
because the
tears.
episode about her having deep feelings is...
It's like Vivi in the whole in the arc with
There's two episodes, I
bomb.
should say.
It's 5 minutes, it's gonna explode. She's just constantly in tears and snot.
There's two episodes in which she has feelings, and the entire time he does not, which makes it such a harsh... Because she's going full poetic in her own head, and he's just like, look how many things I can fit in my nose, and then he does a wheelie. Do you know how old the guys in Shonen Bakusozoko are supposed to be? They're all like 16, 17.
I know, but then you look at them and they're massive, like really hairy dudes.
Yeah, that's why I like the older anime when it's like this person is 15 and you look at like
40.
That guy looks 37.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There is no select fire on this gun. That's just how you would fire it semi-auto. You would feather the trigger fast enough to be able to keep her in single or maybe 2-round burst. Not going to be very accurate in semi-auto anyway because of this long lock time, the time between pulling the trigger and it actually firing the gun.